Sure. Good evening, everyone. And my name is Shirley Stitt. I am a licensed clinical professional counselor, but for this evening, I am going to be your facilitator. And it is a pleasure to present this webinar for Restore You Counseling. And tonight it's about understanding adolescent mental health. And I must admit that this is going to be a full hour. So feel free to jot down questions and we'll take them throughout the presentation, but I've allotted time at the end to be able to respond to your questions. And tonight, the information that I'm sharing is really general and not meant to be the on-call clinician and to just ethically can't give the diagnosis, but we always want to make sure that we try to answer any questions that you might have. Tonight, it's really about understanding adolescent mental health. So I hope that when we come away from our time together, our goals for this evening is to increase knowledge about adolescent development, increase your awareness about mental health for youth, and to learn when to seek professional help for development, distress development, and or mental health illness. So I know that we're talking about mental health tonight, but sometimes we forget about how adolescents grow and how they develop. And the way that they grow and develop are really no different than how you or I may grow and develop. But I just want to bring to mind and to talk about these 6 domains that give us, hopefully will give you some perspective and thinking about how children develop. The first area is around how do they develop socially? That is, their interaction with other peers, doing things that are based on their interest. Another way in which they develop is cognitive. We're going to talk this evening about brain development, which is very important to understand, how are they developing cognitively, their ability to process thought and function. Have to think about youth in terms of their creativity. How are they expressing themselves, whether it's through art, through social media, written expression. It is, but how do they develop their creative self? How are they expressing themselves? Another aspect of how young people, adolescents develop is from a physical perspective. If you think about your own self, that maybe when you were born, you may have weighed 6 pounds. Now, today, fast forward, you've, have some weight on you as well as height. But how are we developing physically? And then also spiritually to think about what are the morals and values that they are developing. And then the last area of development is their emotional development. That is, how are they feeling loved? Are they being loved unconditionally? Do they feel like they are supported, that they are respected? Who gets them? Who's understanding who they are? And the areas in front of you are thinking about how they develop and what is being given to them, what are the resources that are helping them to grow in each area so that they become the best possible person that they can be. So I like this little question, because if you are an adult and you've interacted with children, you may have found yourself asking a young person, what were you thinking? Did you even think? So, sometimes they might shrug their shoulders, they might go, I don't know. And you're looking at them like, how could you not know? You weren't thinking. Well, one of the things that I mentioned earlier was thinking about how young people develop. And one area of development is their cognitive abilities. So we need to sometimes keep in mind that that their brain development is the brain is the last part. Um, the way that our brains develop is from the back of our neck kind of forward. So the last part of the brain that actually develops is the frontal lobe. And this is the part of the brain right here that is responsible for reasoning, planning, for emotions, problem solving. And so the frontal lobe doesn't fully develop until most people are in their early 20s, so 18, 19, 20, 21, somewhere in those early 20s, does this part of the brain that is responsible for those things that are listed on the screen actually happen. So sometimes when they tell you that they don't know and they weren't thinking, that it's the truth. So when we think about overall development and mental health, there are a number of factors that can affect adolescent development. Everything from relationships that might involve peer pressure, um, family and peer conflict, dating can affect an adolescent's development, work, trauma. Last week, we talked about trauma as a part of when we think about racism and the whole idea around trauma being life-threatening events. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that during the presentation tonight, but there are factors that can affect how young people develop and grow overall. And each of these factors, I've labeled them risk factors. And remember, a risk does not mean that any of these factors does not necessarily mean that a young person will not grow and develop, but these things could have an adverse effect on them as they are growing. One component that has a major effect on our youth and their development is youth violence. And I just want to take a moment to just share a few statistics and definition about the impact of youth violence, which is really a form of trauma because it is life-threatening, whether it happens directly to them or whether they witness it, or it happens in the community, there is still exposure that could have an adverse effect on their overall development. One of the definitions, and if you can, as you're reading this on the screen, homicide is the third leading cause of death for youth. Young people ages 10 to 24, and it's the leading cause of death of non-Hispanic, Black, or African American youth. So we know that youth violence is common, whether we're living in Washington, D.C., whether we're in Baltimore, whether we're in Michigan, we know that it is common. It's also considered, and this information comes from SAMHSA, that youth violence is considered a serious public health problem, and it is an adverse childhood experience, meaning that there was a study done by Kaiser Permanente that interviewed over 1,000 adults, and questions were asked about certain experiences that they occurred before the age of 18. So studies have been done that says that when young people experience an ACE, an adverse childhood experience, that it can have a long-term impact on health and their well-being. The definition of how it is defined, youth violence is the intentional use of physical force or power to threaten or harm others by young people in the age of 10 to 24. And also youth violence, although we speak about these terms, bullying or fighting, we don't necessarily put it in the classification as violence. So again, homicide is the leading cause of death for non-Hispanic, Black, or African American youth. Every day, 1,000 youth are treated in an emergency department for physical assault-related injuries. And when you think about the cost of youth violence, it's estimated that it costs nearly $21 billion annually. And that number is estimated, but it includes medical and whatever productivity costs that are with youth violence. I see that someone has raised a hand.
Yes. Did you want me to allow them to ask the question?
Can we hold the question just for until the end?
Sure, no problem.
Thanks. So when we think about adolescent development, there are risk factors that occur within the individual, family, and community that can put development of youth at risk, and even their mental health. If anyone has ever worked with child abuse and neglect, some of the terms that you hear are associated with that. So when I use the term risk factors, these are same factors that can apply to other aspects that could impact a child's development. So some of the factors are also with a care, and I use the term caregiver because it could be any adult that's responsible for caring for a youth. So some of these are not unfamiliar to us and we may know them, but definitely if a young person is being raised or has a caregiver who's dealing with their own issues of substance use, um, their own mental health issues, even including depression. Many times being a caregiver, adults are not necessarily understanding of what children need. And it just may be that, you need to maintain just those basic things, food, shelter, and clothing. If there are caregivers who may have high levels of parenting stress and economic stress and not able to take the time or don't have the time because they're working multiple jobs and trying to support the home to be able to really give the attention and care that is needed. So caregivers can have certain risk factors that impact development of youth and their mental health. Family risk factors can include families that are isolated and not connected to other family members or not connected to other people like friends and neighbors or extended family. If there's any kind of incarceration or absence of members that play a key part in the family structure, family violence, also known as domestic violence that occurs within the home, or if there are families who experience high conflict and negative communication styles. With the community, if any of you are working in community, you know that there are communities that are not providing, that there's unstable housing where people are frequently moving from place to place, maybe moving in communities where they're not access to resources that can help with youth development. If there are communities where there are high rates of crime and violence, in a community that is really isolated from one another, and a lack of community involvement, These are just a few risk factors that have an impact on our children and families. So now to talk about youth mental health, which is one aspect of how our young people grow. So when you look at this picture, what do you see? Take a moment, look at the picture, and when you're looking at it, what do you see? So as you look, you will observe that this child is sitting alone by him or herself. Body posture is bent, head down. I can't quite tell if they're on a cell phone or just holding their hands together. But when I look at the picture, it looks and appears as though this child is sad and perhaps lonely. So when we think about mental health, I wanted to just give two different distinctions. We talk about mental health, and it's just your general state of well-being and your state of mind. But mental illness carries a different definition, and it's something that disrupts your mental state, interrupts how you think, how you feel, communicate, and how you behave. So these 10 common warning signs of mental health conditions are things that we should observe, not only in our adolescents, but also to observe in other family members and friends, and just, people in general. We're coming out of COVID and isolation, and for 18 months, we've all, our lives have been changed. So here are just a few things. It does not, the list is, there's an exhaustive list depending upon what the disorder is, but generally, um, if you notice that someone is feeling sad or withdrawn for more than 2 weeks, if there are significant changes in eating habits, are they not eating? Are they throwing up? Is there significant weight gain or loss? Are they seriously trying to harm or kill themselves, or are they making plans to do so? So is the person suicidal? Is there a use of drugs and alcohol? Are there severe mood swings that are causing problems in relationships? Are there intense worries or fears about things that are getting in the way of daily activities, such as going to school, leaving the house, not wanting to leave a person's side? Are there out of control behaviors, risky behaviors that are causing harm to self or others? And are there any drastic changes in their behavior, their personality, or hygiene habits? When we think about common mental health disorders in adolescents, I really just want to focus and just bring a little attention to, if any of you are parenting, if you are working in the school system, anxiety has seen an increase in anxiety in adolescents. So it is characterized by feelings of excessive uneasiness, worry, and fear. And this occurs approximately in about 32% of 13 to 18-year-olds. The other is depression, which is also considered to be a mood disorder. So it's a depressed mood that affects thoughts, feelings, and daily activities, including eating and sleeping and working. And that occurs in approximately 13% of 12 to 17-year-olds. So, our young people have youth are resilient in spite of the risk factors. And so when we use the term resiliency, it is defined as what gives people the emotional strength to cope with trauma, adversity, and hardship. There are adolescents as they are growing and living in community that, in spite of what happens, they really are resilient. They have that ability to cope and to deal with life effectively. And again, it is requires what are the strengths within that individual adolescent, what are the strengths of the family, and what are the strengths of the community really help with development and with young people who are struggling with their own mental health issues. So this term, protective factors, what are the protective factors, conditions, or attributes that are needed to help adolescents successfully deal with stressful events, their mental health, but what are those conditions, those positive things that are needed? And so some of the factors that help young people um, uh, be resilient and manage and deal with their own mental health and their overall development is having a good support system. Who can they go to? Where can they go to for that support that's needed? And maybe it's not in the it's not within the immediate family, but school can be a place of support, and there can be places of support within the community. Um, their ability to have a good self-image, to have future goals and plans and to carry them out, being able to communicate what it is that they are feeling, having some sense of confidence in their own strengths and abilities, and to learn and to have good problem solving skills. So when we think about resiliency and what is needed, a little bit about those resources. And I want to spend some time talking about mental health. When we think about mental health, there's a difference between a person becoming, how do I put this? Mental health carries a stigma within our community. There's an image, and if you say a person has mental health, we think that they're crazy, they're whatever the word may be. But mental health is really something that we all have, and we all have to be concerned about our overall mental health. And so when we take the stigma out of it, there are people and places that can help provide early intervention as opposed to waiting until a person becomes unwell and then trying to seek help for an individual. If we have some understanding about how they develop, how they are growing, and knowing that there are factors that may put them at risk and be of challenge to their mental health, we do want to get early service, early intervention. As a therapist, I have had an opportunity sometimes to work with children, and I know that families will send a child to go see a therapist and to seek mental health service. But sometimes when you have a family member that's dealing with mental health, it requires the whole family to be engaged and to receive education and techniques and support on how to help a person, help an adolescent who does have mental health, how to help them cope with, manage, and take away some of the stigma regarding mental health. There are supportive services and resources that can help support adolescent mental health, whether it's in the community, having different outlets and activities that help to promote a sense of well-being and positive image, and having safe places where young people can just go and just talk about whatever may be on their mind. Preventative services, certainly access to counselors. There are different programs that will help and prevent young people from having to find themselves in situations where their mental health is compromised. Also, there are crisis intervention services, and Channing is going to talk about what preventive services and crisis intervention services are available in the immediate community in which she serves. And also with education, the more information that we have about mental health, we will able to make the distinction around what is normal and what is not, and that we have the information and would not just brush it off and think that, that that's something that doesn't happen to individuals, or that it doesn't happen to us. And with more education, I think then we have the ability to make better informed decisions when we seek to identify and some of the resources that are needed. So I'm sorry. Um, this is your time, Channing. I see that you have appeared. So you can go back to the resources, and then we'll take the question and answer any questions. I know I've said. Channing?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for the presentation. Definitely shared a lot of, I think, helpful information, and people reached out. They do have questions, so I'll be brief. So as far as crisis intervention services, for those who reside in the Woodland Terrace community, I think they're all pretty much aware Exodus Treatment Center and the different crisis intervention services that they offer. They offer pastoral care, as well as case management, where I actually serve as a case manager, connecting people to different resources based on their needs. There are other options. SAMHSA has a hotline that can provide with resources in your area. So if you don't reside in the Washington, D.C. area, they have a hotline you can call from anywhere in the US, and they'll give you a list of providers that accept your insurance, or if you don't have insurance, that can help you get connected with a provider. Um, as well as, I think we talked about this a little bit, people aren't aware if, for example, you have an emergency and you call 911, if you report that it's a mental health emergency, they actually have crisis team and even police officers who specialize in how to address mental health crisis. So it's important if you are in a crisis and you do call to mention that, because that can be an additional resource that they'll bring along as they provide those services. Was there anything else you thought to add, Shirley?
Um, and I should really have the number in front of me, but you can call the National Suicide Hotline. I think
Absolutely.
um, I'm going to Google,
Okay, it's no
but
problem.
it's
What
the
I can,
National Suicide Hotline, and then NAMI is the National Alliance of Mental Health Illness. They have chapters in every jurisdiction. Because of COVID right now, that I do know that they offer a virtual online support groups
mhm.
to help family members who are dealing with family members who have mental health illness, but they also have peer-to-peer support group and recovery group, so that, sometimes we can say, I don't understand what you're going through. I don't know what that's like, but it is very helpful and supportive to know that you're not alone in your particular mental health or whatever it is that you may be dealing with. So NAMI is a place. the National Suicide Hotline, there's a line for domestic violence
Mhm.
to be able to call and to get information and resource. And if there's a local crisis mobile unit where you are, sometimes if there is a mobile crisis unit, and that is a service that is available in your particular community, they will come out, do assessment, treatment, and in some cases, they come prepared, offering preventive resources, but also can do a crisis intervention right then and there on.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's a lot of different resources out there. And if anybody was interested in any specific type of resource, you can feel free to reach out to me directly. You can put it in the chat or something like that. And I can definitely send the specific information. I did put the National Suicide Hotline, which is 800-273-8255. I did put that in the chat. Yeah, and I think even as you were talking about NAMI, they also, I believe, have a teen group as well. So they have like specific one for teens if there is a teen or youth who has a mental health diagnosis.
And also, well, because in Baltimore, I do know that we have the Black Mental Health Alliance that is very active in the Baltimore community. So sometimes it's helpful when you can have resources and are interacting with people look
Mhm.
like us.
Mhm.
That gives a sense of trust and safety.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to go ahead. I know that Miss Woods had a question. So I'm going to go ahead and allow her to talk so she can ask her question. I will reiterate that, today you're not here to diagnose anyone or anything like that. We're just generally talking about mental health and different tools as well as resources, some warning signs to look out for, to be able to refer to someone so that they can actually do the diagnosis and they can do the treatment. All right. All right, Miss Woods. Are you still there? Okay. I guess she's not there. Did anybody else have any questions or concerns? While we're doing that, I'll go ahead and share the poll. And I guess, Shirley, if you wanted, you could kind of go through the different responses.
I absolutely will. I absolutely.
All
Okay.
right.
So for the first question, adolescent brain development takes place in the temporal lobe. And everyone said that that is true. And that is actually false because it takes place in the frontal lobe, which is responsible for planning, for reasoning, for emotions, and problem solving. The second question, 20% of youth between the ages of 13 to 18 have a mental health condition, and that is true. I want to add that that is a condition that exists between the ages of 13 to 18. But actually, the onset of mental health illness in children begin at least 8 to 10 years earlier. So there's an early onset. And because of the, say, a 7-year-old or I'm bad with my math right now, but if a 5-year-old is beginning to exhibit certain behaviors that might cause concern, that may be an early onset, might be an indicator, but it doesn't necessarily mean. So it's not until you get to be about 13 to 18 that there's a mental health condition. And Um, uh, while we say 20%, there's also another age range to be concerned about, and that is young people between the ages of 19, say 25, can also develop and have some mental health conditions. So 8 to 10 year range for onset. The third question was childhood trauma affects adolescent development, and that answer is true. Number 4, I'm reading from my answer sheet, but number 4, homicide is the third leading cause of death for young people between the ages, young people, and that is just for all young people between the ages of 10 to 24, that is true. And we know within community of color that it is the leading cause of death. And the estimated cost of youth violence is estimated not at $1 billion, but $21 billion a year. So that answer was false. And question number 6, the answer, 32% of adolescents ages 13 to 18, they do have an anxiety disorder. That answer is true. One thing that I want to say about these percentages is that the only way these percentages are actually ever known is if professional care is sought and the person is treated for a mental health condition. Many mental health disorders go untreated and therefore never reported. So the number could actually be higher than what is reported. And the last question, having a positive attitude is a contributing factor to resiliency. The answer is true.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So if no one else has any questions, then we'll go ahead and wrap up. But just want to thank you all for attending, and definitely if anybody had any feedback or wanted to share anything with Shirley before we get ready to wrap up, you can go ahead and type that in the chat so she can hear your feedback, or let us know if you have any additional questions. But yes, I want to thank you, Shirley, so much for being here tonight. I know it's probably a long day for
A
you.
little bit, but I did not want to rush. And so, you know, in doing these kind of polls and this kind of webinar, and you know, as a therapist, I get to see everybody and I get to have the interaction. So this, I'm just seeing you and no one else. So to the audience and to whoever is listening and is still tuned in, I used to be a school teacher. So this is going to be helpful to me. If I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm going to ask that you please respond in the chat. What will be the one thing that you will take away from tonight's webinar?
Well, while they're doing that, we do have a question. The question is, how can you tell if a teen is going through depression?
So with depression, it is within looking at 2 weeks. Have there been significant changes in their mood? Are they feeling sad? Are they tearful? You know, are they feeling sad, kind of on the inside and numb? Are they sleeping more than usual? Teens sleep, so sometimes it's hard to tell, are they depressed or are they just sleeping all the time? And so that's why talking about how are they developing, we need to have that understanding. But significant changes in sleeping and eating habits, weight loss, isolating, significant changes in their social interaction, and not wanting to be around their friends and their peers, and just kind of reporting sad, and not feeling hopeful or having a positive outlook. And also, if there has been anything significantly that has happened in the home, any major changes also affect depression. So the question would be, has anything significantly happened in the home, in school, or in community? And a change in their behavior could be how they are responding to the situation. So for a period of time, if you think about yourself, we may have, you know, felt a way initially, and then with time, our feelings and our emotions and behavior change. So monitor, but if it begins to interrupt their daily activity, um, loss of interest and pleasure, and they just really stop doing what they were doing, that is then cause and then seek professional help. Um, and so I'm sorry for the loss of a loved one, Denise, and I know that there are grief support groups for children as well as adults,
Mm,
and understand that everyone grieves differently. And from an adult perspective, we really model for them what that process is. So sometimes we may not want to show as adults our feelings and our tears because we think that we have to be strong. And I think sometimes that trying to be strong is what can mess us all up,
yeah.
because we don't have that outlet. And there is real reason for being able to talk openly and to share those feelings, to let them know that what they're feeling, it's okay, and everyone needs help with the grieving process. So, Annie, are you doing grief work in the
We
community?
Yeah, so for those in the Woodland Terrace community, we do have a grief and loss group that's taking place now on Mondays. We don't have one for youth at this time, but that's something that we are working on. But we can definitely help to connect with some outside resources for youth who are in need of like grief and loss counseling or participating in a group. So if that is the case, feel free again to send me a private message here or contact me outside of here so we can help to connect you or connect your children to some services.
Mhm.
But if you are an adult, we still have, I think it's 2 more sessions of the grief and loss group coming through the Woodland Terrace community. But yes, there are other resources outside of what Exodus offers. Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that question, Ms. McDuffie. Right. So before we wrap up, I know Shirley presented a question. She wanted to see what is one thing that you all will be taking away from the webinar. So I don't see anything so far as it relates to that, but please go ahead and submit that. Allow you a few more minutes. But yes. So, yeah. Or if you have any other questions before we get ready to wrap up. This is valuable stuff. Miss Shirley is a very busy lady, so.
And so, well, I like being able to be of service, and I know that my own level of I got to get through it all. It may have, but what I will say is that when we think about our young people, we only see them from one perspective, and we have to think about where they are emotionally and their own mental health. And it really becomes difficult to help someone else with their own emotional well-being and their own mental health when we may not be in a good place. We might have our own biases about mental health, but it really isn't about us. It's about what do they need. And we see what happens when mental health issues are not addressed.
Mhm.
adequately and properly addressed early on, it just really leads to puts them at greater risk.
Mm.
And sometimes, we talked about youth violence, and sometimes that could have been averted had resources to really help them cope,
Yeah.
manage their own mental health,
Mhm.
because these are young people who are committing acts of violence against other young people.
Yeah, yeah. And I love what you said in the other webinar when you talked about talking with youth about mental health. And it was really about creating a safe space. So allowing a space, a time for kids to be able to just get out what it is that they're feeling, and they don't have to worry about being punished for saying how they feel, or they don't have to worry about any negative consequences, or things like that.
Mhm.
It can make a world of difference where you can probably get a lot more information from them to see, what is going on in regards to their mental health, so that you can be able to connect them to resources if they need that.
Absolutely. I think back in the day, they used to call them, oh my God, rap groups. I don't know.
Oh.
Remember? Used to just be a rap group, and it would just be, and there were places in the community where, you could just come and you could drop in and you could just talk. No
Mhm.
judgment, no. And there definitely is a lot to talk about these days. And so
Yeah,
everybody needs that free space.
absolutely.
And it doesn't take a lot of effort, but particularly in communities that, remember we talked about community violence, and
Mhm.
how communities possess certain risk factors that impact the youth development and their mental health. It is thinking about there are safe places in community, and so there are places of worship. So what would happen if in a place of worship that
Mm,
doors were open
yeah.
to say, come in right, no guns, no weapons, but if
Mhm.
you need to talk, this
We're
is a
here.
place where you can talk,
Yeah.
um, as a
I think
response.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the great things about Exodus Treatment Center with Apostle Hill and his team, is that they are that safe space. And a lot of people, I think even a lot of people participating in the webinar today have identified it as a safe space they can go to and just
Mhm.
talk, or, get some things off their chest. That's a safe space, and also, a place that they can go to for counseling, and for spiritual care and things of that nature. So it looks like we do have a question for you, Shirley,
Sure.
from
I have to put my
Apostle.
glasses on so I can see.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to read it for you?
Oh, I do see it.
Okay.
Yes, yes. I put my glasses on. Yes, yes. I do think that mental health should be a part of the curriculum, because sometimes that's just not a part of who we are that we ever touch.
Mm,
And what would happen if we were told that it's okay to feel sad? It's okay, to be angry, but here's what you need to do when you're angry,
mm,
and how we
mhm,
educate that, and imagine how challenging it is for a child who has to live in a home with a caregiver who has mental health
mm,
that is not being addressed.
yeah, yeah.
And
So,
so a child's self-esteem is thinking that I am not good enough,
mhm.
that I am bad, something, but, and they don't know how to respond to that.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think that's a great point. A lot of things, especially I think nowadays, a lot of children are experiencing a lot of traumatic events. and not knowing how to process it. And a part of that is, having family discussions about difficult things that maybe the kids have witnessed or seen to help them. And that was another thing you said in the other webinar, being able to help children to understand what is it that they witness, what is it that they've experienced, because they do create their own narratives about themselves and about the world based off of their experiences, but they don't have the knowledge and the insight that adults have to really be able to process some of those difficult things that they've experienced in a healthy way. So they end up having that negative self-talk, and even the not trusting other people, creating these
Mhm.
belief systems based off of some of the things they experienced, but it wasn't really explained to them what was going on,
Mhm.
and giving them the narrative that they needed to be able to survive in that moment, but not take on this negative view of self. So, absolutely, I definitely agree with that. If they had that in the school system and they were able to have this outside place where they're able to learn and understand about mental health, what a world of difference it would make. And speaking of resiliency, right, that would put them in a posture of having more resilience, because they were more aware, of what was happening within themselves and maybe even within their families. So I think that's definitely a great point. Yeah,
But
absolutely.
perhaps one day we'll get there,
Mhm.
that will happen. And I think that it probably could, but it goes back to, are you recognizing this as a public health issue? And are
Mm,
you willing to really make sure that mental health gets fully funded
yeah,
um, in communities, in schools, that you have a full-time staff person who's available to all students, that
mhm,
you don't have to wait and to have those resources that are split,
yeah,
um, particularly where there are high rates um, of just, economic disparity, education, income, crime, all of that in a
mhm,
community should have those full resources available and accessible.